I'm sorry. I think I just got into the wrong car. The words slipped out of Emily Carter's trembling lips as the door shut behind her with a soft, expensive click that didn't belong in her world. And for a second, everything went still. The rain outside, the distant hum of traffic, even the sharp, panicked rhythm of her own breathing. As if the universe itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Her fingers tightened instinctively around the small bundle in her arms. Her baby girl Lily wrapped in a thin, worn blanket already, damp from the cold Seattle rain. The fabric clinging to her tiny form as a weak cry broke through the silence, fragile and desperate, cutting straight through Emily's chest. She hadn't meant to open this door, hadn't meant to step into something so polished, so silent, so utterly out of place compared to the chaos she'd just come from. The flickering streetlight, the puddles soaking through her worn sneakers. The driver who had waved her off the moment he saw her count out coins with shaking hands. She thought this was her ride, the one she'd been waiting for, the last chance to get Lily somewhere warm, somewhere safe, somewhere with medicine before the fever climbing through her daughter's tiny body got worse. But the moment she looked up, really looked, she knew. This wasn't a rideshare. This wasn't even close. The leather beneath her was too smooth, the air too warm, carrying a faint scent of something clean and expensive, the kind of scent she'd only ever noticed when passing by. People who didn't have to check their bank balance before buying groceries. And then there was him. He sat across from her in the dim interior, his silhouette sharp against the soft glow of the city lights filtering through tinted windows. A man who didn't move right away, didn't react the way she expected. No anger, no raised voice, just a quiet, steady presence that made her heartbeat stumble in confusion. The driver glanced back through the rearview mirror, his expression tightening, clearly. Waiting for an order, waiting for the moment this mistake would be corrected, for her to be told to get out and take her soaked clothes and sick baby back into the rain where they belonged. Emily's throat tightened as she shifted slightly, already preparing to apologize again, to reach for the door handle, to step back into the cold and pretend this moment had never happened. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "I thought this was my ride. I'll just stay." The single word stopped her before she could move. It wasn't loud, it wasn't harsh, but it carried a quiet authority that settled into the air like gravity itself. Emily froze, her hand hovering inches from the door, her breath catching as she looked back at him properly this time. His face was clearer now, early 30s, maybe, strong lines softened only slightly by the low light, eyes that didn't look away from her, didn't flinch at the sight of her soaked clothes or the way she held her. Baby like the world might fall apart if she loosened her grip even a little. Lily let out another small cry, weaker this time, her tiny face flushed, her lashes damp against her cheeks. Instinctively, Emily adjusted the blanket, murmuring soft, broken reassurances that sounded more like pleas than comfort. "She's burning up," she said without thinking, the words slipping out as fear overrode pride. "I just need to get her somewhere warm. I didn't mean to." The man didn't interrupt her again, but something in his gaze shifted, something almost imperceptible, like a door opening just enough to let something human through. He leaned forward slightly, just enough for the light to catch the sharp edge of his expression, and Emily noticed the details she hadn't before. The tailored coat, the quiet precision in the way he held himself, the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm but from control. "Drive," he said, not taking his eyes off her. The driver hesitated for half a second, then nodded and pulled away from the curb, the car gliding smoothly into the rain-slicked street as if this had always been the plan. Emily's heart jolted as the motion carried them forward, her instincts screaming that this was wrong, that she shouldn't be here, that she didn't belong in this world of tinted windows and quiet commands. "You don't have to," she started. Again, her voice cracking under the weight of everything she hadn't said all day. The rejection, the exhaustion, the fear that had been building with every passing hour. "I know," he replied simply. The answer caught her off guard, not dismissive, not impatient, just certain. Lily's cries softened slightly as the warmth of the car settled around her, the gentle hum of the engine creating a rhythm that seemed to soothe her just enough to ease the sharp edge of her discomfort. Emily let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. her shoulders dropping just a fraction as the tension eased. Though her mind still raced with questions she didn't dare ask, she became suddenly aware of how out of place she must look. Her damp hair clinging to her face, her jacket worn thin at the sleeves, her hands red from the cold. She shifted slightly, trying to make herself smaller, trying not to leave any trace of her presence in a space that clearly wasn't meant for her. "What's her name?" the man asked after a moment, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. Emily hesitated, the question catching her somewhere deeper than she expected. "Lily," she said finally, her gaze dropping to the tiny face nestled against her chest. For a brief second, something flickered across his expression, something she couldn't quite place, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady and relentless, blurring the city into streaks of light and shadow. But inside the car, for the first time that night, Emily wasn't cold. She wasn't standing under a flickering streetlight counting coins or bracing herself for another rejection. She was sitting in a place she didn't understand, beside a man she didn't know, holding on to a moment that felt fragile and impossible all at once. And somewhere between the quiet hum of the engine and the soft, uneven breaths of her baby, a thought crept in, small and uncertain, but impossible to ignore. Maybe, just for tonight, she hadn't made a mistake at all. The city lights slid across the window like blurred streaks of gold and white, melting into the steady rhythm of rain as Emily Carter sat frozen in the back seat. Her arms wrapped protectively around Lily, who had finally quieted into soft, uneven breaths. The warmth inside the car felt almost unreal, pressing gently against her damp skin, seeping through the thin layers of her worn clothes. And for a moment, she forgot how cold she had been just minutes ago standing on that footpath with water pooling around her shoes. She shifted slightly, careful not to disturb her daughter, her fingers brushing over Lily's forehead again, still too warm, still not right. And the worry returned instantly, sharp and familiar, cutting through whatever fragile comfort this place offered. "How long has she had the fever?" the man asked, his voice steady, as if this were a normal conversation between people who belonged in the same world. Emily hesitated, glancing up briefly before looking back down at Lily, unsure how much to say, unsure why he even cared. "Since this afternoon," she answered quietly, her voice carrying the weight of hours spent pretending it would pass on its own. "I tried to keep her cool, but it is getting worse." The man gave a small nod, his gaze flicking briefly to the driver, then back to Emily, as if recalculating something invisible. "Nearest hospital," he said calmly. The driver responded immediately, turning the wheel with precise control as the car shifted direction, merging smoothly through traffic without hesitation. Emily's breath caught again, this time not from fear, but from disbelief. "You do not have to do that," she said quickly, her voice almost apologetic, as though she were asking for something unreasonable simply by existing in this space. "I will manage." He studied her for a moment, not with pity, not with judgment, but with a quiet kind of attention that made her feel seen in a way she was not used to. "You were trying to get there anyway," he replied, his tone matter of fact. "This is faster." The simplicity of it left her without an argument. She looked down again, her throat tightening as she adjusted Lily's blanket, her fingers trembling slightly from exhaustion more than cold now. Outside, the rain continued to fall, tapping softly against the windows, but inside the car, everything felt contained, controlled, like nothing could go wrong here, and that thought alone made her uneasy. She was not used to things going right. A soft beep broke the silence as the man's phone lit up briefly in his hand. He glanced at it, then pressed a single button, bringing it to his ear. "Daniel Whitmore," he said, his voice shifting subtly, still calm, but carrying a sharper edge of authority that made Emily's chest tighten, without understanding why. There was a pause, then he continued. "I need a pediatric team ready in 10 minutes, private entrance." Another pause, shorter this time. "Yes, tonight." He ended the call without further explanation, slipping the phone back into his coat, as if what he had just done required no thought at all. Emily blinked, her mind struggling to keep up with what she had heard, the words not fully landing yet. But something about the way he said them, the certainty, the expectation that things would simply be arranged, made her stomach twist. You called. The hospital? She asked hesitantly, unsure if she had misunderstood. I called someone who works there, he corrected lightly, though his expression remained unreadable. Emily swallowed, her heart beginning to beat a little faster, not from fear exactly, but from the unfamiliar sense that things were moving too quickly, too smoothly, like she had stepped into someone else's life by accident and the rules no longer applied. Lily stirred in her arms, letting out a soft whimper, and Emily instinctively rocked her gently, whispering quiet reassurances, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. The man watched for a second, his gaze lingering not on the child alone, but on the way Emily held her, the way her entire body curved protectively around something so small, as if nothing else in the world mattered. Something in his expression shifted again, subtle but undeniable, like a memory brushing against the surface. She trusts you, he said after a moment. Emily blinked, surprised by the comment, glancing up at him with uncertainty. She does not have a choice, she replied softly, though there was no bitterness in her tone, only a quiet truth. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. Children always have a choice, he said, more to himself than to her. The car slowed as it approached a set of traffic lights, the red glow reflecting briefly across the interior, casting both of them in a muted, almost unreal light. Emily caught a clearer look at his face then, the sharp lines softened slightly by the color, and for a brief second she saw something unexpected there, not distance, not coldness, but something closer to thought, to hesitation, as if he were considering something he had not planned for. The light changed and the car moved again, smooth and effortless, the city opening up ahead of them. Why are you helping me? Emily asked quietly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. It hung in the air between them, fragile and honest, carrying more than just curiosity, carrying years of experience that had taught her help always came with a cost. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked out the window for a moment, the passing lights reflecting faintly in his eyes, then back at her. Because you needed it, he said simply. The answer was so direct, so unembellished, that it left her with nothing to push against. She looked down again, her chest tightening in a way she did not fully understand, her grip on Lily shifting slightly as emotion pressed unexpectedly at the edges of her control. Outside, the hospital came into view, its bright lights cutting through the rain like a promise she had not dared to believe in just an hour ago. The car turned smoothly toward a side entrance, one Emily would never have noticed on her own, and as it came to a gentle stop, the world seemed to hold its breath again, just like it had when she first stepped inside. Emily looked at the door, then back at the man, her voice barely more than a whisper. Thank you. He inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging something small, something ordinary. Go, he said, and for the first time that night, Emily did not hesitate. The door opened before Emily Carter could reach for the handle, a rush of bright hospital lights spilling into the quiet cocoon of the car as cool night air brushed against her face, carrying the faint scent of rain and antiseptic. For a brief second she hesitated, her body caught between two worlds, one where everything was controlled and effortless, and the other where every step forward had always required more strength than she felt she had left. Lily shifted in her arms, letting out a weak cry that broke the moment. An instinct took over. Emily stepped out, her shoes meeting the dry pavement beneath the covered entrance. The contrast to the soaked streets she had left behind almost disorienting. This way, Miss Carter, a calm voice said, and she blinked in surprise as a nurse approached with a gentle urgency, already guiding her toward the doors as if she had been expected. Emily frowned slightly, her mind scrambling to understand how they knew her name. But there was no time to question it as the automatic doors slid open and the warmth of the hospital wrapped around her, bright and clean and overwhelming. Everything moved quickly after that, too quickly for her to process. A wheelchair appeared, though she shook her head and kept walking, unwilling to let go of Lily even for a second. Hands reached out, not forceful, but efficient, guiding her into a room that looked nothing like the crowded waiting areas she had seen before. It was quiet, private, the lights softer, the bed already prepared. We will take care of her, the nurse said gently, and Emily hesitated, her arms tightening instinctively around her daughter. I am right here, she replied, her voice barely steady. The doctor entered moments later, his presence calm but focused, his eyes moving quickly over Lily with practiced precision. High temperature, he murmured, already reaching for equipment, his tone reassuring rather than alarming. We will bring it down. Emily stood close, her heart pounding as she watched every movement, every touch, her entire world narrowing to the small rise and fall of Lily's chest. Minutes passed, though they felt like something longer, stretched thin by fear and exhaustion. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension in Lily's tiny body began to ease, her cries softening into quiet whimpers, then into fragile silence. Emily let out a breath she had not realized she had been holding, her knees weakening slightly as relief washed through her in a wave so strong it nearly took her off balance. She reached out, brushing her fingers gently over Lily's cheek, her touch careful, reverent, as if afraid the moment might disappear if she moved too quickly. She will be all right, the doctor said softly, meeting her eyes with a small, reassuring nod. The words settled into her chest, not fully believed yet, but enough to hold on to. Emily swallowed, her throat tight as emotion pressed against the edges of her control. Thank you, she whispered, though the words felt too small for what she meant. The nurse smiled gently, adjusting the blanket around Lily with quiet care. You came at the right time, she said, her tone kind, almost warm. Emily glanced down at her hands then, noticing for the first time how they still trembled, how the faint chill of earlier clung stubbornly to her skin despite the warmth around her. She took a slow breath, then another, trying to steady herself, trying to understand how she had gone from standing alone in the rain to this room where everything seemed arranged, prepared, as if someone had decided she mattered. The thought made her chest tighten again, but this time it was not fear. It was something unfamiliar, something fragile and difficult to name. After a while, when Lily had settled into a deeper, more even sleep, Emily finally stepped back, allowing herself a small distance, just enough to see her daughter, resting peacefully against the crisp white sheets. The sight felt unreal, like something she had imagined during long nights when hope had seemed too far away to reach. A quiet knock came at the door, soft enough not to disturb the stillness, and a woman in a neat uniform stepped inside, holding a clipboard. Ms. Carter, she said gently, offering a polite smile. We just need to finalize the admission details. Emily nodded quickly, her body tensing again out of habit, already bracing for the part she knew too well, the forms, the questions, the numbers she could not afford. She followed the woman just outside the room, glancing back once more at Lily before the door closed softly behind her. The hallway felt cooler, quieter, the sounds of distant footsteps echoing faintly. The woman looked down at her clipboard, then back at Emily, her expression still calm, still professional. Everything has been arranged, she said. Emily blinked, the words not quite landing. I am sorry, she asked, her voice uncertain. The woman tilted her head slightly, as if surprised by the confusion. Your daughter's care, the room, the treatment, she clarified, her tone gentle. It has already been taken care of. Emily stared at her, her mind struggling to catch up, the familiar weight of worry refusing to lift completely. But I have not, she started, then faltered, her voice trailing off as the reality of what she was trying to say pressed against her. The woman offered a small, understanding smile. Mr. Whitmore arranged everything before you arrived, she said simply. The name landed differently this time, heavier, carrying a meaning Emily could not fully grasp, but instinctively knew mattered. She swallowed, her fingers tightening slightly at her sides. I do not know him, she said quietly, almost to herself. The woman's smile softened just a fraction. He knows what to do when something matters, she replied. Emily stood there for a moment longer, the words echoing in her mind, the pieces beginning to shift into something she could not yet define. She turned slowly, her gaze drifting back toward the closed door of the room where Lily lay safe and warm, and for the first time in a long time, the world did not feel quite as heavy as it had before. Somewhere beyond the walls of the hospital, the rain continued to fall, steady and quiet. But inside, something had changed, something small but undeniable, like a light flickering on in a place she had forgotten existed. and though she did not yet understand why or how, she knew one thing with a certainty that settled deep in her chest. Tonight had not been an accident. Emily Carter remained standing in the quiet hallway for a moment longer than necessary. Her fingers still curled slightly, as if holding onto something invisible, something she was not ready to let go of yet. The words lingered in her mind, soft but persistent. Everything has been arranged, echoing against years of experience that had taught her nothing ever came without a cost. She inhaled slowly, the sterile scent of the hospital filling her lungs, grounding her just enough to move. When she stepped back into the room, the shift was immediate, the quiet hum of machines, the soft rise and fall of Lily's chest, the gentle glow of the overhead lights creating a space that felt suspended outside of time. She walked to the bedside with careful steps, as though any sudden movement might disturb the fragile peace that had settled there. Lily lay still, her tiny face no longer flushed with fever, her breathing deeper now, steadier. And for a moment, Emily simply stood there, watching, letting the reality of it sink in slowly, like warmth returning to cold hands. She reached out and brushed a strand of fine hair from Lily's forehead, her touch light, reverent, her eyes softening in a way that only happened when she allowed herself to feel something other than survival. "You are all right," she whispered, more to herself than to the sleeping child. The words fragile, as if speaking them too firmly might break the moment. She sank into the chair beside the bed, her body finally acknowledging the exhaustion it had been holding back, her shoulders dropping, her head leaning slightly against the edge of the mattress. Minutes passed, or maybe longer, time losing its usual sharp edges in the quiet. Eventually, the door opened. Again, this time without urgency, and the same nurse stepped inside, carrying a folded set of clean clothes. "For you," she said gently, placing them on the chair beside Emily. "You might feel better once you are dry." Emily blinked, caught off guard again by a kindness she had not asked for, her instinctive response rising to her lips before she could stop it. "I cannot pay for this," she said softly, her voice careful, almost apologetic. The nurse paused, then offered a small, reassuring smile. "It has already been covered," she replied, her tone simple, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Emily hesitated, her fingers brushing lightly over the fabric, clean and warm and unfamiliar in a way that made her chest tighten. "He did this too?" she asked quietly, not needing to say his name. The nurse gave a slight nod, then stepped back toward the door. "Try to rest," she added before leaving, the soft click of the door closing behind her marking the return of silence. Emily sat there for a long moment, her gaze drifting between Lily and the clothes, her thoughts tangled in a way she could not easily unravel. She was used to counting every dollar, every decision measured against what she could afford, what she could survive without, and now, suddenly, she was in a place where those calculations did not seem to apply. The imbalance unsettled her more than she expected. Slowly, she stood, glancing once more at Lily before stepping into the small adjoining bathroom. The reflection that greeted her was one she barely recognized, damp hair clinging to her face, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, clothes marked by rain and long hours that had blurred into each other. She hesitated, then reached for the clean set, changing quickly, the warmth of the fabric against her skin almost startling in its comfort. When she returned to the room, something felt different, not outside, but within her, a subtle shift, as though she had stepped slightly out of the life she had been carrying for so long. She sat back down, her movements quieter now, more deliberate, her gaze returning to Lily with a softness that held both relief and disbelief. The hours moved gently after that, the night stretching on without urgency, nurses checking in occasionally, their voices low, their presence calm. At some point, Emily's eyes closed, not fully asleep, but resting, her body finally giving in to the fatigue it could no longer hold back. When she opened them again, the light had changed, the deep darkness of night softened into the pale gray of early morning, the rain outside reduced to a faint mist that clung to the windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was, the stillness unfamiliar, until her gaze found Lily, still sleeping, still safe, and everything came rushing back in a quiet wave. She exhaled slowly, sitting up, her senses sharpening again as reality settled into place. A soft knock broke the calm, and the door opened just enough for a different staff member to step in, holding a small tablet. "Good morning, Miss Carter," she said politely, her tone professional but warm. "We just need a signature to complete the admission record." Emily nodded, taking the device with slightly unsteady hands, her eyes scanning the screen without really seeing the words. Her attention caught on the final line where the total cost would normally sit. Instead, there was nothing, just a note, already settled. Her breath caught, her fingers pausing midair. "There must be a mistake," she said quietly, looking up. The staff member shook her head gently. "There is no mistake," she replied. "It has all been taken care of." Emily stared at her for a moment longer, then looked back at the screen, the absence of numbers feeling louder than anything she had ever seen. Slowly, she signed, her hand moving almost automatically, though her mind remained elsewhere, circling the same question without finding an answer. When she handed the tablet back, her voice came out softer than before. "Why would he do this?" she asked, not expecting a response. The staff member paused briefly, then gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Some people do not forget what it feels like to need help," she said, before stepping out of the room. Emily sat there in the quiet that followed, the words settling into her thoughts. Not fully understood, but impossible to ignore. She turned back toward Lily, her gaze steady, her heart carrying something new, something fragile but real, like the first light of morning breaking through after a long night. And for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that this was not just about help, not just about chance, but something deeper, something that had begun the moment she opened the wrong door and stepped into a life she had never imagined could touch her own. Morning settled gently over the hospital room, the soft gray light giving way to a warmer glow as the sun rose higher, filtering through the tall windows and casting quiet patterns across the floor. Emily Carter sat beside Lily's bed, her posture straighter now, though the exhaustion still lingered in the slight heaviness of her movements. She had not left the room, not even for a moment longer than necessary, as if stepping away might somehow undo the fragile stability that had finally returned. Lily stirred softly, her small fingers curling against the blanket before her eyes fluttered open, clearer now, no longer clouded by fever. Emily leaned forward instantly, her breath catching as relief filled her chest in a way that felt almost overwhelming. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice softer than the morning light, her hand brushing gently over Lily's cheek. The baby responded with a faint, sleepy sound, her lips parting in a quiet murmur that carried no distress, only the soft confusion of waking in a place that was unfamiliar but safe. Emily smiled, a small, fragile expression that had not touched her face in a long time, her eyes glistening as she let herself believe, just for this moment, that everything was going to be all right. A nurse entered shortly after, her presence calm and unhurried, checking Lily's temperature with practiced ease before offering a reassuring nod. "Much better," she said, her tone warm. She responded well. Emily exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing further, the tension that had been coiled inside her for days finally beginning to loosen. "Thank you," she said again, though this time the words carried more strength, more certainty. The nurse smiled, making a few notes before glancing briefly toward the door, as if considering something. "You might have a visitor later," she added lightly. Emily frowned slightly, confusion flickering across her expression. "I do not think anyone knows I am here," she replied, her voice careful. The nurse's smile deepened just a fraction, but she did not explain, simply nodding once before stepping out. The room returned to its quiet rhythm, the soft sounds of morning settling around them. Emily looked down at Lily again, her fingers tracing small circles on the blanket, her mind drifting back to the events of the night before, replaying them in fragments that still felt unreal. The car, the voice, the way everything had shifted so quickly. Daniel Whitmore. The name echoed in her thoughts now with a weight it had not carried before, not just a person, but something larger, something that belonged to a world she had only ever seen from a distance. She had heard the name before, in passing conversations, in headlines glimpsed through shop windows, always attached to words like company, investment, success. It felt impossible to connect that image with the man who had simply said stay and meant it. Hours passed quietly, measured in small moments. Lily feeding, resting, watching the light move across the room. Emily found herself relaxing into it, just a little, though a part of her remained alert, waiting for something to change, for the balance to shift back to what she understood. By late morning, a gentle knock sounded at the door, different from before, more deliberate. Emily looked up, her body tensing slightly out of instinct. The door opened slowly, and for a second, everything seemed to pause again. Daniel Whitmore stepped inside, his presence filling the space not with force, but with a quiet certainty that drew attention without demanding it. He looked exactly as she remembered, composed, controlled, his expression unreadable at first glance. Emily rose from her chair almost immediately, unsure whether to stay, to speak, to thank him again, or apologize for something she could not name. "You came," she said softly. The words simple but carrying everything she could not quite articulate. He inclined his head, slightly, his gaze moving briefly to Lily, then back to Emily. "How is she?" he asked, his voice calm, steady. "Better," Emily replied, her fingers tightening slightly at her sides. "They said she will be fine." A small pause followed, not uncomfortable, but filled with something unspoken. Daniel stepped a little closer, not too near, maintaining a distance that felt intentional, respectful. "Good," he said quietly. Emily hesitated, then drew a slow breath, gathering the courage to ask what had been pressing at her since the moment she heard his name. "Why did you do all this?" she asked, her eyes meeting his directly this time, her voice steady despite the vulnerability beneath it. He held her gaze for a moment, as if weighing the question, or perhaps considering how much of the answer to give. "Because it needed to be done," he replied simply. Emily frowned slightly, the response both clear and incomplete. "Most people would not," she said softly. He did not deny it. Instead, his gaze shifted briefly to the window, where the last traces of rain clung to the glass, catching the light in small, fading patterns. "Most people are busy," he said, his tone neutral, though something in it suggested there was more beneath the surface. Emily studied him quietly, trying to understand the space between what he said and what he did, the difference between someone who could help and someone who chose to. She looked down at Lily again, then back at him. "I cannot repay you," she said, the words careful, honest. He shook his head slightly, almost dismissing the idea. "You do not have to," he replied. The simplicity of it unsettled her more than any demand could have. She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped, the words failing to form. For a moment, they stood there in silence, two people from completely different worlds, connected by something neither of them had planned. Daniel's gaze softened just slightly as he looked at Lily once more, then back at Emily. "Take care of her," he said, his voice quieter now. Emily nodded, her throat tight again, her emotions rising in a way she could not fully contain. "I will," she whispered. He gave a small nod, then turned toward the door, his movements as composed as when he had entered. Just before he reached it, he paused, his hand resting briefly on the handle. "You did not get into the wrong car," he said without turning back. The words hung in the air long after he left, settling into the quiet space of the room, leaving Emily standing there with her heart full of something she had not felt in a very long time. Not relief, not gratitude, but something deeper, something that felt like the beginning of a story she did not yet understand. The door closed softly behind Daniel Whitmore, the quiet click echoing longer than it should have in the stillness of the room, and Emily Carter remained where she stood, her eyes fixed on the space he had just left as if something invisible still lingered there. His words settled slowly, not loud, not dramatic, but steady, like something meant to stay. "You did not get into the wrong car." She exhaled quietly, her fingers curling slightly at her sides before she turned back toward Lily, drawn again to the small, steady rhythm that grounded her. The room felt different now, not just safe, but changed, as though something unseen had shifted its shape around them. Emily returned to the chair beside the bed, sitting down with a slower, more deliberate movement, her gaze softening as it rested on her daughter's face. Lily blinked up at her, more alert now, her tiny hand stretching outward until it brushed against Emily's wrist, the contact light but certain. Emily smiled faintly, a warmth spreading through her chest that felt unfamiliar in its steadiness. "It is just us again," she whispered, though the words felt different this time, less heavy, less alone. The hours that followed moved gently, carried by small routines that felt almost peaceful, a nurse checking in, a quiet conversation, a soft laugh when Lily made a small sound that resembled something close to a giggle. Emily found herself responding to these moments without the constant edge of worry that had once defined every breath. But even as calm settled, her thoughts drifted back again and again to the man who had stepped into her life without warning and left just as quietly, leaving behind something she could not measure or repay. She tried to place him in a category she understood, a stranger, a benefactor, someone who had simply helped and moved on, but none of those felt complete. There had been something else in the way he looked at Lily, something that had not been obligation or curiosity, but recognition of something deeper, something human. By early afternoon, the doctor returned, his tone reassuring as he explained that Lily could likely be discharged by the next morning if her temperature remained stable. Emily listened carefully, nodding at each instruction, committing every detail to memory as she always did, but her mind caught briefly on one thought. Leaving tomorrow meant stepping back into the life she had left outside, the one waiting beyond these clean walls, with its uncertainties and limitations. The contrast felt sharper now, harder to ignore. When the doctor left, Emily stood and walked slowly to the window, her reflection faint against the glass as she looked out at the city below, the streets still damp, the movement of people continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She pressed her fingers lightly against the cool surface, grounding herself. "Again, what happens now?" she murmured under her breath, not expecting an answer. Behind her, Lily shifted, and Emily turned immediately, returning to the bedside, her focus snapping back to what mattered most. She adjusted the blanket, her movements gentle, her touch steady. Time passed, measured in quiet, until a soft knock sounded again at the door. This time, when it opened, it was not a nurse or a doctor, but a man in a dark suit, his posture composed, his expression polite but reserved. Emily straightened slightly, her instincts alert again as she stood. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone respectful. "My name is Thomas Reed. I work with Mr. Whitmore." The name carried weight now, more than before, and Emily felt it settle into the room like something tangible. "Is everything all right?" she asked cautiously, her voice steady but guarded. Thomas gave a small nod. "Everything is in order," he replied, then extended a small envelope toward her. "Mr. Whitmore asked that I give this to you." Emily hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface, her gaze lifting briefly to meet his. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Information," he answered simply. "In case you need anything further." Emily looked down at the envelope again, her mind already racing with possibilities she did not fully understand. Slowly, she opened it, her movements careful, revealing a simple card inside, thick and understated, with a name she now recognized, Daniel Whitmore, and a number beneath it. Nothing more, no explanation, no expectation. She stared at it for a moment longer than necessary, her thoughts shifting, uncertain. "He did not have to do this," she said softly, almost to herself. Thomas's expression did not change, but there was a subtle shift in his tone when he spoke again. "Mr. Whitmore does not do things because he has to," he said. The words lingered, quiet but clear. Emily closed the envelope slowly, her fingers tightening slightly around it as she absorbed what that meant. She looked back at Lily, then at the card again, the weight of it far greater than its size suggested. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice steady, though her emotions moved beneath the surface. Thomas inclined his head slightly, then stepped back toward the door. "If you require anything, you may use the number," he added before leaving, the door closing softly behind him. The room returned to its quiet once more, but the stillness felt different again, layered now with something new, something that extended beyond this place. Emily sat down slowly, the envelope resting in her hands, her gaze drifting between it and Lily. She did not know what she would do with it, did not know if she would ever call, But for the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like a closed path. It felt uncertain, yes, but also open in a way she had not expected. She looked down at Lily, her expression softening as a quiet determination settled into her chest. Whatever came next, she would face it, not alone in the way she once had been, but with the knowledge that somewhere beyond the limits of her world, someone had seen her, had chosen to help without asking for anything in return, and that, more than anything else, changed everything. The envelope rested lightly in Emily Carter's hands, but its presence felt heavier than anything she had carried in a long time, not because of what it contained, but because of what it represented. She turned it over slowly, her fingers tracing the clean edge, the simple weight of the card inside reminding her that this was real, that the night before had not been something she imagined in exhaustion. Lily shifted softly in her cot, drawing Emily's attention back instantly, grounding her in the quiet rhythm that mattered most. She stood and moved closer, her steps gentle, her expression softening as she leaned down and brushed her fingertips across Lily's tiny hand. "We are all right," she whispered again, though this time the words carried something steadier, something that felt closer to belief. The afternoon passed in small, quiet moments, each one simple, almost ordinary, but to Emily they felt unfamiliar in their calm. She fed Lily slowly, watching her with careful attention, noting every sign of comfort, every small movement that told her the fever had truly broken. Outside the window, the sky had cleared completely, sunlight stretching across the city, drying the streets that had been soaked just hours before, leaving behind a brightness that felt almost symbolic. Though Emily would not have put it into words, she remained by Lily's side, the envelope never far from her reach, her thoughts returning to it again and again, circling the same question without resolution. By late afternoon, the nurse returned with a quiet update, confirming that Lily's condition remained stable and that discharge in the morning was certain. Emily nodded, her gratitude quiet but sincere, her mind already shifting ahead to what tomorrow would bring. She would step outside again, back into a world where nothing was arranged in advance, where every decision would matter, where every dollar would count. The contrast pressed against her thoughts more sharply now that she had experienced something different. When the nurse left, Emily picked up the envelope again, her hesitation lingering only a moment longer before she slipped the card fully into her hand, studying it in the soft light. The name printed there no longer felt distant or abstract. It felt connected to something real, something she had experienced firsthand. She turned it slightly, as if expecting more information to appear, but it remained simple, unchanged, just a name and a number. She exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening slightly around it before she set it back down on the small table beside the bed. "I do not know what to do with you," she murmured under her breath, her voice thoughtful rather than uncertain. Lily made a small sound, almost as if responding, and Emily smiled faintly, the expression lingering longer this time. As evening approached, the light in the room softened again, the bright edges of day giving way to a quieter, warmer tone. Emily dimmed the light slightly, settling back into the chair with a blanket draped loosely over her shoulders, her gaze drifting between Lily and the fading light outside. Her body was still tired, but her mind felt clearer than it had in days, no longer clouded by immediate fear, no longer pushed forward by urgency alone. Instead, there was space to think, to reflect, to consider something beyond the next moment. And inevitably, her thoughts returned to him, Daniel Whitmore. She replayed their brief conversation in her mind, the simplicity of his words, the way he had spoken without hesitation, without expectation. She had met people before who had more than she did, people who carried themselves with confidence or distance, but there had been something different about him, something she could not quite define. He had not looked at her with pity, had not treated her as a problem to solve or a burden to remove. He had simply acted, as if helping her had been the most natural decision in the world. The memory unsettled her in a quiet way, not because it was uncomfortable, but because it challenged everything she had come to expect. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and she looked up as the door opened slightly, a nurse stepping in with a gentle smile. "Evening check," she said softly, moving to Lily's side with practiced ease. "Emily." watched closely, her instincts still alert, though no longer tense. The nurse completed her check quickly, offering another reassuring nod before pausing near the door. "You should try to rest tonight," she said kindly. "Tomorrow will be a big day for you both." Emily nodded, though she was not entirely sure rest would come easily. After the nurse left, the room returned to its quiet once more, the soft hum of the building settling into the background. Emily leaned back in her chair, her eyes drifting closed for a moment, then opening again as if she were not ready to let go of this time just yet. She reached for the envelope once more, holding it between her fingers, turning it slowly as her thoughts moved in quiet circles. This was more than help, more than a moment of kindness. It was a choice, his choice, to step into her life, even briefly, and change something that had felt fixed for so long. She did not know what would happen next, did not know if their paths would cross again. But she knew this much: she would not forget. She could not. She looked over at Lily, her expression softening once more as she stood and adjusted the blanket gently, her touch careful, her movements unhurried. "We will be okay," she whispered, her voice steady now, carrying a quiet confidence that had not been there before. And as the last light of day faded completely, leaving the room in a calm, gentle glow, Emily sat back down, the envelope resting in her hands, her mind no longer asking why, but beginning, slowly, to consider what it might mean. The night settled gently over the hospital, the soft hum of distant activity fading into a quiet rhythm that wrapped around the room like a protective layer, and Emily Carter remained seated beside Lily, her posture relaxed but attentive, her eyes adjusting to the dim glow of the bedside lamp. The envelope rested in her lap now, untouched for several minutes, though her fingers still lingered near it as if drawn by something she could not fully explain. Lily slept peacefully, her breathing even, her small chest rising and falling in a steady pattern that Emily found herself matching unconsciously, as though syncing her own calm to the child beside her. Outside the window, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky, reflections stretching across the glass in soft, wavering lines, and for the first time in what felt like a long while, Emily allowed herself to sit without urgency, without the constant need to calculate her next move. She leaned back slightly, her head resting against the chair, her gaze drifting upward before slowly returning to Lily. "You scared me," she whispered softly, her voice barely more than a breath, carrying the quiet truth of the night before. Her fingers reached out, brushing lightly against Lily's blanket, grounding herself again in the warmth of the moment. The hours passed slowly, gently, and eventually fatigue began to settle in more deeply, pulling at her eyelids, softening her thoughts. She closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment, but the stillness held her there longer than she intended, her breathing deepening as her body finally surrendered to rest. When she woke again, it was to the faint shift of early dawn, the sky outside transitioning from deep blue to pale gray, the first light of morning slipping quietly into the room. Emily blinked slowly, her senses returning, her gaze immediately finding Lily, still asleep, still calm, and the relief that followed was softer now, more stable, no longer sharp or overwhelming. She straightened slightly, stretching her shoulders before glancing toward the small table where the envelope remained. For a moment, she simply looked at it, the decision forming slowly rather than suddenly. She reached out, picking it up again, her fingers more certain this time as she slid the card free and held it between her hands. The name no longer felt distant or unreachable. It felt connected to a choice, one she now had to make. She exhaled quietly, her thumb brushing over the printed letters before she reached for her phone, hesitating just briefly before entering the number. Her heart beat a little faster as she stared at the screen, the call button waiting, the moment balanced on something unseen. "It is just a thank you," she murmured softly, as if reassuring herself. She pressed the button before she could reconsider. The line rang once, twice, each second stretching longer than it should have, until finally it connected. "Whitmore office," a calm, professional voice answered. Emily hesitated, her words catching for a fraction of a second before she found them. I am looking for Daniel Whitmore," she said, her voice quiet but steady. There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by a shift in tone, still polite. but more attentive. "May I ask who is calling?" the voice replied. Emily swallowed lightly, her grip tightening slightly around the phone. "Emily Carter," she answered. Another pause followed, longer this time, and for a moment she wondered if she had made a mistake. If this call would disappear into a place where she did not belong. Then the voice returned, different now, carrying a note of recognition. "Please hold for a moment, Miss Carter." The line went silent except for a faint background tone, and Emily found herself holding her breath without meaning to. She glanced toward Lily, grounding herself again, her free hand resting lightly against the edge of the bed. Seconds passed, then the line clicked softly. "Emily." His voice came through, calm, unmistakable. She froze for a fraction of a second, surprised by how easily he said her name, as if it belonged in his world. I hope I am not disturbing you," she said quickly, her words careful, though her voice carried a quiet sincerity. "You are not," he replied, his tone steady, unchanged. She paused, searching for the right words, the ones that felt enough for everything she needed to say. "I just wanted to thank you," she said finally, her voice softer now, more certain, "for everything you did for Lily and for me." There was a brief silence, not empty, but thoughtful. "How is she?" he asked. Emily glanced at Lily, a small smile forming without effort. "She is better," she replied. "They are discharging us this morning." "Good," he said, and though the word was simple, there was something in it that felt genuine. Emily hesitated again, her thoughts shifting as she considered what to say next. "I do not know how to repay you," she admitted quietly. His response came without delay. "You do not need to," he said. She exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing slightly, though the question that had been forming since the moment she picked up the card still remained. "Then why did you give me this?" she asked, her voice steady, her eyes resting on Lily as she spoke. There was a pause on the line, longer this time, as if he were considering the answer carefully. "Because sometimes," he said slowly, "people need more than a moment." The words settled into her chest, deeper than she expected, carrying a meaning that extended beyond the simple act of help. Emily remained quiet for a moment, letting them sit, letting them shape something new within her understanding. "I see," she said softly, though what she felt was more than just understanding. It was recognition. The conversation lingered briefly after that, simple, calm, before drawing to a natural close. When the call ended, Emily lowered the phone slowly, her gaze drifting back to the card still in her hand. She placed it carefully on the table beside her, not as something uncertain anymore, but as something real, something chosen. She turned back to Lily, her expression soft, her heart steady in a way it had not been before, and as the morning light filled the room completely, washing away the last traces of night, Emily understood something she had not fully seen until now. Some moments change your path, but others change the way you see the road ahead. And this, quietly, was both. The discharge papers felt lighter in Emily Carter's hands than any document she had ever held before, not because they carried less weight, but because for the first time, they did not come with fear attached to them. She stood near the foot of Lily's bed, listening carefully as the nurse explained the final instructions, her focus steady, her mind clear in a way that felt unfamiliar but welcome. Lily rested comfortably against her shoulder now, her small body warm but no longer burning, her quiet breaths brushing softly against Emily's neck as if confirming everything the doctor had said. "You are all set," the nurse finished with a gentle smile, handing over a small bag with medication and notes. "Just follow the dosage and come back if anything changes." Emily nodded, her gratitude sincere, her voice calm as she responded, "Thank you. I will." The simplicity of the exchange struck her. How different it felt from the tension she had expected, how different everything felt. She adjusted Lily slightly in her arms, her movements natural now, grounded again in the rhythm she knew best. As she turned toward the door, her gaze drifted once more to the small table where the card still lay, untouched since the morning call. For a brief second, she considered leaving it behind, letting it remain part of this place, part of a moment that had already changed everything. But her hand moved before the thought could settle, picking it up carefully and slipping it into her bag, not as a burden, but as something she chose to carry. The hallway outside was brighter now, filled with the quiet movement of staff and visitors, the ordinary flow of a place that saw countless stories begin and end each day. Emily walked slowly, her steps measured, her awareness sharper as she crossed from one world back into another. The lift ride down was silent, the mirrored walls reflecting a version of herself that looked more composed than she felt. Though something in her eyes had changed, something steadier, more certain. When the doors opened, the ground floor greeted her with soft morning light streaming through large windows. The rain from the night before gone without a trace, leaving behind clear skies and a sense of quiet renewal. She stepped outside, the fresh air cool against her face, carrying the faint scent of damp pavement warming under the sun. For a moment, she paused there, standing just beyond the entrance, adjusting Lily's blanket, taking in the simple fact that they were leaving, that they were stepping back into the life waiting beyond this place. Her thoughts flickered briefly to practical things, transport, groceries, the small flat that felt too quiet some nights, the balance she would need to rebuild again. But the weight of those thoughts felt different now, less overwhelming, as if something had shifted just enough to give her space to breathe. "We will manage," she murmured softly, her voice steady, her gaze lifting to the street ahead. A car pulled up near the curb, sleek and familiar in a way that made her pause instinctively. Her heart gave a small, unexpected reaction, not fear, not uncertainty, but recognition. The door opened, and Thomas stepped out, his posture as composed as before, his presence calm but purposeful. "Ms. Carter," he said politely, offering a slight nod. "Mr. Whitmore asked that I make sure you returned home safely." Emily blinked, surprised, her grip tightening slightly around Lily as she processed the words. "That is not necessary," she replied gently, her instinctive response returning, though it felt softer now, less defensive. Thomas did not argue, but his expression remained steady. "It has already been arranged," he said simply. The phrase echoed something familiar, and Emily found herself exhaling quietly, the resistance she might once have held easing without a fight. She glanced down at Lily, then back at the car, the decision forming not from pressure, but from understanding. "All right," she said finally, her voice calm. Thomas opened the door for her, stepping back to allow her space, his movements precise but unobtrusive. Emily entered the car carefully, settling Lily against her chest once more, the familiar warmth surrounding them again. Though this time it felt different, not foreign, not overwhelming, just possible. The door closed softly, and as the car began to move, Emily looked out the window, watching the city pass by in clear daylight, every detail sharper now, every moment grounded in reality rather than urgency. Her mind drifted briefly to the call that morning, to the way his voice had carried through the line with quiet certainty, to the words he had chosen, not grand, not complicated, but meaningful in their simplicity, because sometimes people need more than a moment. She repeated the thought silently, letting it settle more deeply, letting it reshape something within her. The journey was smooth, unhurried, the car moving through familiar streets that looked slightly different now, as though she were seeing them with new clarity. When they arrived at her building, the contrast returned briefly. The modest entrance, the worn steps, the quiet reminder of the life she had always known. Thomas stepped out first, opening the door for her once again, his expression unchanged. "If you need anything, you may contact the number," he said, his tone respectful. Emily nodded, her grip firm but relaxed as she adjusted Lily. "Thank you," she replied, her voice sincere. She turned toward the building, taking a few steps before pausing, something pulling her to look back. The car remained there, still, waiting, not imposing, not demanding, simply present. She held the moment for a second longer, then turned again, continuing inside. The familiar space greeted her quietly, unchanged, but she felt different. As she crossed the threshold, her steps lighter, her posture straighter, she moved through the small flat, setting Lily down gently, adjusting the blanket with care, her movements filled with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. She stood there for a moment, looking at her daughter, then at the space around them, and for the first time, it did not feel like something she had to endure. It felt like something she could shape. She reached into her bag, her fingers brushing against the card once more, not as a question now, but as a possibility. And as sunlight filtered through the window, filling the room with a soft, steady glow, Emily understood something simple but profound. Sometimes, the smallest mistake does not lead you away from your path. Sometimes, it shows you a path you never knew you were allowed to take. The small flat felt quieter than Emily Carter remembered, not empty, but still, as if it had been waiting for her to return with something more than just tired footsteps and careful breathing. She moved slowly through the space, adjusting to the familiar layout. The worn sofa near the window, the small kitchen bench with its neatly stacked items, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Lily rested peacefully in her arms, her tiny fingers curled gently against Emily's sleeve, her breathing steady and warm. A quiet reminder that everything that mattered was right here. Emily crossed the room and placed her gently into the cot beside the window, her movements careful and unhurried, as if she were placing something precious back into its rightful place. She adjusted the blanket, tucking it lightly around Lily's small form before pausing, her hand lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "We are home," she whispered softly, the words carrying both comfort and something new, something steadier than before. She stepped back slowly, watching for any sign of discomfort, but Lily remained calm, her face relaxed in a way that eased something deep inside Emily's chest. The sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, casting soft lines across the room, illuminating small details she had once overlooked, the chipped edge of the table, the faded fabric of the chair, the quiet simplicity of a life she had built piece by piece. It was not perfect, it was not easy, but it was hers. Emily turned toward the kitchen, her steps lighter now, her mind already shifting into familiar patterns, water to boil, bottles to clean, small tasks that grounded her in routine. She moved with quiet efficiency, though there was no rush, no urgency pressing against her shoulders. The difference was subtle, but undeniable. After a few minutes, she paused, her hands resting on the edge of the bench as her thoughts drifted again, not to worry, not to what she lacked, but to what had changed. The card. She reached into her bag, pulling it out once more, holding it between her fingers as she leaned slightly against the counter. Daniel Whitmore. The name felt different here, in this space, less distant, more real, yet still connected to a world far removed from the one around her. She turned it slowly, her eyes tracing the clean lettering, her mind replaying his voice from the morning, calm, certain, as if nothing about their interaction had been unusual to him. Because sometimes people need more than a moment. She exhaled quietly, the words settling again, shaping something she was only beginning to understand. She placed the card gently on the table, not hiding it away, not discarding it, simply letting it exist as part of her present. The day moved forward in small, steady steps, feeding Lily, tidying the space, opening the window slightly to let in the fresh air that carried the faint scent of the city outside. Each action felt grounded, deliberate, as though she were rebuilding her sense of normal one moment at a time. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet awareness, a sense that something larger had shifted, something that extended beyond the walls of this flat. By late afternoon, Lily stirred again, her soft cries drawing Emily instantly back to her side. She lifted her gently, holding her close, rocking slightly as she murmured quiet reassurances, her voice soft but confident. "It is all right," she whispered, her cheek resting lightly against Lily's head. The rhythm came naturally, the connection immediate, as if nothing had changed and everything had at once. When Lily settled again, Emily sat near the window, holding her, watching the street below as people passed by, each one moving through their own world, their own concerns. She wondered briefly how many of them had experienced something unexpected, something that had shifted their path without warning. How many of them had stepped into a moment that changed everything quietly, without announcement. The thought lingered, not heavy, but thoughtful. As the light began to fade, casting a warmer tone across the room, Emily found herself glancing at the card again, its presence steady, unintrusive, yet impossible to ignore. She picked it up once more, not with hesitation this time, but with consideration. She did not know what the next step would be, did not know if there was a next step at all, But she knew this much: the choice existed. And that alone was something she had not had in a long time. She stood, moving toward the small shelf near the door, and placed the card there, visible, accessible, not hidden, not forgotten, a quiet acknowledgement that whatever this was, it was part of her life now. She returned to Lily, settling beside her once more, her posture relaxed, her expression calm. The room grew quieter as evening settled in, the soft glow of a lamp replacing the fading sunlight, the world outside continuing its steady rhythm. Emily leaned back slightly, her eyes resting on her daughter, her thoughts no longer racing, no longer searching for answers. Instead, they moved gently, exploring a new sense of possibility, one she had not allowed herself to consider before. She did not know where it would lead, did not know what it would bring, but she felt something shift within her, something steady and certain, not hope in the way she had once understood it, fragile and easily broken, but something deeper, something rooted in the simple fact that change had already happened. And as she reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against Lily's hand, she understood something quietly, something that did not need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes, the most important thing is not what someone gives you, but what they remind you you are allowed to have. And for the first time in a long while, Emily Carter allowed herself to believe that her life could be more than just surviving. It could be something she could shape, something she could choose, one moment at a time. The evening settled into a quiet rhythm inside the small flat, the soft glow of the lamp casting warm light across the worn furniture as Emily Carter sat beside Lily's cot, her posture relaxed but attentive, her eyes moving between her daughter and the simple space around her. Nothing had changed on the surface, the same narrow walls, the same faint creak in the floorboards, the same distant hum of traffic filtering through the window. Yet something within her had shifted in a way that made everything feel slightly different, slightly more open. Lily slept peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that Emily had come to trust again. And for a moment, she allowed herself to simply sit and watch, her hands resting loosely in her lap instead of clenched with quiet tension. She exhaled slowly, the breath deeper than it had been in days, as if her body was finally remembering how to rest without fear. Her gaze drifted toward the shelf near the door where the card lay, its presence quiet but unmistakable, not demanding attention, yet impossible to ignore. It had been hours since she placed it there, hours in which she had returned to routine, to familiar tasks that once defined her entire world, and yet each time her eyes found it, something stirred within her, not uncertainty, but consideration. She stood slowly, crossing the room with measured steps, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the shelf before she picked up the card again, holding it between her hands as if weighing more than just its physical weight. "What do you want me to do with this?" she murmured softly, though she knew the question was not truly meant for him. It was meant for herself. She turned the card once more, her eyes tracing the name, the number, the simplicity of something that carried so much potential. She had spent so long making decisions based on necessity, on survival, that the idea of choice, real choice, felt unfamiliar, almost fragile. She leaned back slightly against the wall, her thoughts moving quietly, not rushing, not pressing, just unfolding. The memory of his voice returned again, calm, steady, certain, and she realized it was not what he had done that stayed with her the most. It was how he had done it, without hesitation, without expectation, as if kindness was not something extraordinary, but something natural. She looked back toward Lily, her expression softening instantly, her entire world narrowing and expanding at the same time. Everything she did, every decision she made, came back to this small, sleeping child, to the life she was trying to build with limited means and quiet determination. But now, for the first time, there was something else, a possibility that had not existed before, not because it had been hidden, but because she had not believed it was meant for her. She moved back to the chair beside the cot, sitting down slowly, the card still in her hand, her fingers no longer tense, no longer uncertain. "Maybe it is not about needing help," she whispered under her breath, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe it is about knowing when to accept it." The words settled into the room, soft but clear, and for a moment, everything felt still again, as if waiting for her to decide what came next. Outside, The city moved on, people returning home, lights flickering on in windows across the street, each one holding its own story, its own quiet struggles, and small victories. Emily had always been part of that unseen current, moving through life without expecting anything beyond what she could manage on her own. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she was aware of something more. She placed the card gently on the small table beside her instead of returning it to the shelf, a subtle shift, but one that felt intentional. It was no longer something distant, something separate from her life. It was something within reach. Lily stirred softly, her tiny hand stretching outward again, and Emily leaned forward instinctively, her fingers wrapping gently around it, grounding herself once more in what mattered most. "We will figure it out," she whispered, her voice steady, her gaze soft but certain. The uncertainty of tomorrow remained, the practical realities waiting just beyond this quiet moment. But the fear that once accompanied those thoughts had lessened, replaced by something quieter, something stronger. She leaned back slightly, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing even, as the night settled more deeply around them. The room felt smaller again, familiar, but no longer limiting. It felt like a beginning rather than an end, and as Emily Carter sat there, her hand resting gently over Lily's, her thoughts no longer trapped in what she lacked, but opening toward what might be possible, she understood something simple but powerful. Sometimes, the moment that changes everything does not come with noise or certainty. It arrives quietly, leaving behind a choice, and whether that choice becomes something more depends not on where you come from, but on whether you believe you are allowed to take it. Morning arrived quietly again, not with urgency, but with a gentle shift in light that filtered through the thin curtains and settled softly across the room. And Emily Carter woke with a sense of calm that felt unfamiliar but welcome, her body no longer tense, her mind no longer racing ahead to problems she had not yet faced. For a moment she remained still, listening to the quiet, the soft breathing from the cot beside her grounding her before anything else. Lily slept peacefully, her tiny hand resting near her cheek, her expression relaxed in a way that made Emily's chest tighten with something close to gratitude. She sat up slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she leaned over the cot, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the blanket, confirming what she already knew, that her daughter was safe, that the worst had passed. "Good morning," she whispered softly, her voice carrying a warmth that had been missing for too long. Lily stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open, and for the first time in days, there was no discomfort in them, only quiet curiosity. Emily smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that lingered as she lifted her gently, holding her close, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. The day began simply, as it always had, preparing a bottle, opening the window to let in fresh air, the sounds of the street below rising slowly as the city came to life. But beneath the routine, there was a quiet awareness, something new woven into the familiar. Emily moved through the small flat with steady purpose, her steps lighter, her thoughts clearer, as though a weight she had carried for too long had shifted just enough to let her stand differently. As she placed Lily back into the cot, her gaze drifted once more to the table where the card rested, its presence no longer uncertain, no longer something she avoided looking at, but something she acknowledged without hesitation. She walked toward it slowly, picking it up with a sense of intention that had not been there before. This was no longer about what he had done, no longer about gratitude alone. It was about what she would do next. She stood there for a moment, the card held between her fingers, her mind quiet as she considered the path ahead. She did not expect her life to change overnight, did not expect anything to become easier simply because of one encounter. But she understood now that something had shifted within her, something that allowed her to consider possibilities she had once dismissed. She reached for her phone again, not with hesitation this time, but with quiet resolve, her thumb moving across the screen before she paused briefly, her gaze lifting toward Lily. "We try," she murmured softly, as if seeking agreement from the only person who truly mattered. She pressed the call button, the sound of the line connecting steady and familiar now. This time, the response came quicker, the same calm voice greeting her, "Whitmore office." Emily drew a breath, her voice steady as she spoke. "It is Emily Carter. I was wondering if I might speak with Mr. Whitmore. There was a brief pause, shorter than before, followed by a shift in tone, more immediate, more attentive. One moment, Miss Carter. The line clicked softly, and within seconds, his voice returned, clear and composed. Emily. She felt the same brief stillness as before, but it passed quickly, replaced by something steadier, something more certain. I hope I am not interrupting, she said, her tone polite but no longer unsure. You are not, he replied, and there was something in the simplicity of it that made her continue without hesitation. I wanted to ask you something, she said, her fingers tightening slightly around the phone, not from fear, but from the importance of the moment. There was a pause, not dismissive, but attentive. Go on, he said. Emily glanced toward Lily again, grounding herself in what mattered most. Before speaking, you said that sometimes people need more than a moment, she began, her voice calm, measured. I think you are right, but I do not want to only receive something. I want to build something as well. The words came more easily than she expected, shaped by thoughts she had been forming quietly since the night before. On the other end of the line, there was silence, not empty, but thoughtful, as if he were listening more closely now. What are you asking for? He said finally. Emily exhaled softly, the answer clear in her mind. A chance, she replied, her voice steady. Not help, not money, just an opportunity to work, to earn something, to move forward properly. The words settled into the space between them, carrying a weight that was not heavy, but real. For a moment, she wondered if she had said too much, if she had crossed a line she did not fully understand, but she held her ground, her gaze steady as she waited. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted. Slightly, not in authority, but in something closer to interest. Come to the office, he said simply. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Emily blinked, the response so direct that it took a moment to settle. Are you sure? She asked quietly. Yes, he replied, just as simply. There was no elaboration, no condition, just certainty. Emily felt something steady rise within her, not excitement, not relief, but something deeper, something grounded. Thank you, she said, her voice sincere, though the words felt different now, less about gratitude, more about acknowledgement. We will see, he replied, and though the phrase was neutral, there was something in it that felt open rather than closed. The call ended. Shortly after, and Emily lowered the phone slowly, her gaze drifting back to the card in her hand. For a moment, she simply stood there, the reality of what had just happened settling into place. She had not asked for rescue. She had asked for a chance, and for the first time, that did not feel impossible. She placed the card back on the table carefully, not as something fragile, but as something she had already begun to use. She turned toward Lily, her expression softening, her posture straightening with quiet determination. We start tomorrow, she whispered, her voice steady, carrying a promise not just to her daughter, but to herself. And as the morning light filled the room completely, illuminating every small detail of the life she had built, Emily Carter understood something with clarity she had never known before. The moment that changes your life is not the one where someone helps you. It is the one where you decide what to do with that help. The morning arrived with a quiet clarity that felt different from any other day Emily Carter could remember, not because the world outside had changed, but because something within her had settled into place. She stood in front of the small mirror near the door, adjusting the simple blouse she had chosen with careful hands, her reflection looking back at her with a calm determination that had not been there before. Lily rested in her arms, warm and peaceful, her tiny fingers curling gently against Emily's shoulder as if sensing the shift in her mother's energy. We are going somewhere important today, Emily whispered softly, her voice steady, carrying a quiet promise that reached deeper than the words themselves. She glanced once more around the small flat, taking in the familiar details, the worn edges, the soft light filtering through the curtains. Everything that had once felt like the limits of her world, now feeling like the foundation of something stronger. She moved toward the door, pausing only to pick up the card from the table, slipping it carefully into her bag, not as a reminder of what had happened, but as a symbol of what could happen next. Outside, the air was fresh, the sky clear, the city already awake with movement and purpose. Emily stepped onto the footpath, adjusting Lily's blanket as she walked, her steps steady, her posture upright in a way that felt natural now rather than forced. The journey to the office felt longer than it should have, each minute stretching slightly under the weight of anticipation, but she did not rush, did not allow doubt to take hold, instead focusing on the rhythm of her breathing. The warmth of Lily against her, the quiet certainty that had begun to guide her. When she arrived, the building rose above her, tall and composed, its glass reflecting the bright morning light in a way that made it seem almost untouchable. For a moment, Emily paused, her gaze lifting as she took in the scale of it, the contrast between this place and the life she had known. But the hesitation that might once have followed did not come. Instead, she stepped forward, her hand steady as she pushed through the entrance, the cool, polished interior greeting her with a calm, controlled atmosphere. The receptionist looked up as she approached, her expression professional but attentive. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. Emily nodded, her voice clear. "I have an appointment with Mr. Whitmore." There was a brief pause, the receptionist's eyes flicking to her screen before returning with a small, acknowledging nod. "Of course, Ms. Carter. Please take the lift to level 23. Emily thanked her quietly, her heart beating just a little faster as she moved toward the lift, the mirrored walls reflecting her composed expression back at her. When the doors opened, she stepped inside, the ascent smooth and silent, each floor passing beneath her like a quiet reminder that she was moving towards something new. When the doors opened again, she was greeted by a quieter space, more refined, the atmosphere shifting subtly from public to private. A man in a tailored suit approached, his posture composed, his expression neutral but respectful. "Ms. Carter," he said, offering a slight nod. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." Emily followed him down the corridor, her steps measured, her focus steady, until they reached a large door that opened into an office filled with natural light, the city stretching out beyond the windows in a wide, uninterrupted view. Daniel Whitmore stood near the window, his figure still, his attention turning toward her as she entered. For a moment, the room felt suspended, the distance between them holding more than just space, holding the memory of everything that had brought her here. "You came," he said, his voice calm, though there was something beneath it that suggested he had not doubted she would. Emily nodded, her grip on Lily firm but relaxed. "I said I would." There was a brief silence, not uncomfortable, but measured, as if both understood that this moment mattered in a way that words could not fully express. Daniel stepped slightly closer, his gaze shifting briefly to Lily before returning to Emily. "How is she?" he asked. "She is well," Emily replied, her voice carrying quiet confidence. "Thank you." He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging both the answer and the gratitude without drawing attention to it. "And you?" he asked, his tone shifting subtly, not just polite, but attentive. Emily paused for a fraction of a second, then answered honestly, "I am ready." The words were simple, but they held everything she had come to understand, everything she had decided. Something in his expression changed, almost imperceptibly, but enough to suggest that he recognized the weight behind them. He gestured toward a chair. "Sit." Emily did, settling Lily comfortably in her arms as she faced him, her posture upright, her gaze steady. "You asked for an opportunity," he said, his tone direct. "Tell me why I should give you one." The question was not unkind, but it was clear, precise, and it carried an expectation. Emily did not look away, did not hesitate. "Because I will not waste it," she replied, her voice calm. "I do not need someone to carry me. I just need a place to stand and prove what I can do." The room remained still for a moment, her words settling into the space between them. Daniel studied her, not with doubt, but with consideration, as if measuring something beyond what was said. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Good," he said, the single word carrying a quiet finality. He turned slightly, reaching for a document on his desk before placing it in front of her. "Then this is where you start." Emily looked down at the paper, her heart steady, her mind clear, understanding without needing every